Nothing from me. I will say for small update on the Rust stuff. I know recently put out some notes on like what I want to do with the OmniBOR crate. Young Kui had also given some feedback on that and some good discussion. I also have now, there's one more thing I'd like to do for the Gitoid crate, which currently technically supports but doesn't really handle tree objects, which would be used to encode directory structure. Not directly part of what's relevant for OmniBOR, but actually had sort of interest in building that for some OmniBOR adjacent other stuff that I want to build. So
this is happy making for me because you sort of cribbed from some of the stuff I did in Go and smashed it into being Rust idioms, which I highly approve of local idioms. But part of the reason I did the Go the way I did the Go was I had no reason to need tree at the time, but precluding it seemed like bad design.
right.
And so the fact that it's become useful is gratifying to me.
Yeah. So I would like to sit down and do a tree implementation. And Ed, I'm happy to ping you for thoughts. I know you're not like a Rust person, but I'd still, if you have thoughts on it when it's ready, I'd be happy to ping you.
No, absolutely. Well, that's also beneficial to me because I keep meaning to get a little bit deeper into Rust idioms because there's a certain amount of learning curve on Rust mechanics, but I'm old and I've programmed in more languages than I can successfully name at a time. And so language mechanics are no longer particularly difficult, although Rust is much more interesting than most. But language idioms are really where the game is in my world these days.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you do the thing in the Rust-like way, as opposed to just trying to write Go in Rust or Python in Rust or C in Rust? None of which strikes me as a good plan.
Yeah, the best advice I can give there, now that I've written quite a lot of Rust, is within Go, we're infatuated about the interfaces and the shape of what the things they're going to call are going to be. Rust is infatuated with the actual shape and size of the objects. You want to focus on making sure that the data is well laid out, and you always know the size of it and where it's going to end up. And so it's much more data centric than other languages tend to be. And the entire borrow checker and so on tends to be focused around that concept. So if you keep that in mind, the rest of it should be, I think for you, should be easy.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
Like I said, my big challenge there is frankly just breaking off the chunk of time. Well, that and the fact that and we saw a little bit of this. I keep wanting for Rust to be a little bit further along with certain things that it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing
they're good.
The one thing Go has that I wish Rust had, or same with other languages besides Go, is the whole thing where you could in Go you can treat your flow as blocking, and then Go will naturally convert those to the non-blocking versions underneath the hood. I wish for simpler systems that was like, sometimes you need that super detail level of control, but I wish for simpler systems they would just automatically do that under the hood, like, hey, use this framework, and then off it goes, and it just does its thing. Because I think for a lot of people who've never programmed async before, and then suddenly they're finding themselves doing async in Rust, like that's one of the harder lessons people tend to learn.
There are trade-offs. There are deep benefits to starting life async intrinsically, but there are definitely trade-offs to it.
Yeah. Cool. So, do we have any questions from implementers? Okay, so on the next one. So I tried making a doodle poll and I ran into a problem, which is it would only allow me to set one time per day. Has anyone ran into that problem? And if so, how did you get around it?
Oh, that's interesting. I used Doodle recently and did not have that issue. But also like that, I am not a Doodle expert. So I don't really know if I could like guide on how to do it differently.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's a device because the device I have on hand right now is my iPhone, and I'm not close to my laptop at this
Mm.
particular point. So I'm wondering if the functionality on the phone is significantly reduced to the point of uselessness.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I was doing it on a laptop.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I can point out is I have not actually done a doodle poll I've not created doodle polls, but I've taken many of them that have had multiple times per day.
Yeah, and that's what I remember. And when I went through it, it's like there's like a 3-page wizard, and it's like select the dates that you want. And then it's like, okay, I selected like 4 dates, and then it says, okay, what time do you want per day? So I have 1 hour schedule, and I only have the start times, and it's like, okay, where how do I add more? There's like nothing there. It's like, okay. And so I'll see if I can I'll see if I can gain access to a laptop and then create it through that. Um, and so I'll see what I can get out shortly then, because I think that might be the problem then.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, so that's it for that one then, I guess. For the use case document, I know we've had a couple rounds of discussion. I think what I would like to do is sit down and do a first sort of full draft of it. Just in part because I think it is much easier to critique stuff that has been written rather than to come up with things. I think we have a decent set of use cases that are described in the document already, as well as other sort of interesting notes and thoughts that can make it in, or if they don't, can be sort of reserved for future writing. The one thing I think would be helpful for me is at least a conceptual deadline for when I can try to have this thing done. It's helpful to sort of push me to do it.
Priorities.
Yeah.
I feel you.
So this is for KubeCon, right?
Oh, Frederick. Yeah, so I will throw out a bit of randomness on that front, and I don't know if it's a good suggestion. It's just a suggestion, which is we have upcoming paper deadlines for Usenix. And what you basically are looking at is going through and writing this stuff and hopefully moving it into a place where it can be upstreamed into the Rust compiler as a feature. And it strikes me there's a lot of interesting stuff you would end up learning along the way that would be suitable for a Usenix paper potentially. Just sort of throwing a random thought out there.
Yes, well, I will say that Rust work is still conceptual, given that the OmniBOR crate doesn't really exist. Like it exists, but there's nothing useful in it.
No, I understand. I don't know. It was a random thought.
Yeah. No, I think maybe next year I need to actually sit down and implement the OmniBOR crate first, and then can try to start talking with the Rust project folks about what potential integration of Rust C might look like, and if they're interested in or amenable to that, even in an experimental kind of thing, like behind a flag or something. So for the use case document, I think 18th. It basically gives me 2 weeks to sit down and draft something.
Okay.
Okay, so it is for KubeCon. Okay. Yeah, so 18th is 2 weeks. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, two meetings from now.
Okay, cool.
Cool. And I mean, if anyone else wants to still give input, stick stuff in the document, please feel free. The document, remains open. Okay, for the SPDX thing, we've talked about this in previous meetings. I think this is just more like when to actually do the thing and submit PRs.
I didn't quite catch that. Was that a specific question or?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So basically this gets to sort of like the question mark. This is more like, is there someone who would like to volunteer to submit PRs to the SPDX 2.3 and SPDX 3 repositories. Basically, we've made prior contributions that added references to OmniBOR as like an identifier scheme or whatever SPDX calls it. But those were submitted before we basically reworked the terminology to center on, artifact identifier, artifact input manifest, all of that. And so at least it'd be good if someone could do a pass over the prior language, and if it no longer reflects the way that we describe things in the SPDX spec, to basically submit PRs to correct it.
Yeah, I think the big one there is going to be they currently refer to the thing as an ADG, and I think we're currently referring to them as input manifest IDs, which intrinsically point you to an ADG in some sense for the thing. But yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do, and I keep meaning to find some time to go do that. And it may or may not even be timely, depending on where they are in their standard for this stuff. Maybe that we simply add documentation, because who knows, the tag may have been baked.
Sure.
But but this does provide like really interesting and useful stuff. One of the reasons that they included it was they really internalized the notion that there may be metadata related to the thing that differed from the metadata that you could capture in SPDX itself. And by including the ADG, you could associate metadata that was created on a different timescale, different life cycle, different formats, etc., and match it up with the SBOM.
My puppy's getting into things. So Ed, sounds like maybe put your name on this, recognizing that
let's do put my name on it.
Maybe it doesn't happen before the next meeting, but that's all right.
Yeah, but then I can have the requisite amount of guilt.
All right. For the minimum viable governance, I think this was basically, there had been like kind of a long-standing to-do, just like at the top of the doc, that said, hey, we should figure out governance at some point. And then Ava, I actually don't know what CSL was supposed to mean here. This was a comment that was already in there. But Ava was going to sort of do some referencing against other stuff related to this, and I should have put the link in here. There's an open issue on the spec repo, which points out that the code of conduct for the project basically says, hey, if you have a code of conduct issue that you've identified, please email. And then there's just like, it's like an insert email address here. Like there's no actual email address.
So we should get an appropriate ombudsman person in there.
Yeah. So that's related here. And I should put that link in.
Yeah, that would be definitely something to get corrected. And it's always a little bit trickier with a smaller community, because ideally you want someone who's a little bit to the side of the power structure of the community.
Right.
In case there is a conduct issue with the power structure in the community.
Yeah, agreed. So, I don't know the right answer, but I will go through and at least add the link here so that we can tag it for future discussion. I feel like if we can get Ava and have her for this discussion, that would be good.
Well, it's a space that Ava knows tremendously well.
Yeah, and has
done a lot of work with it. It may even have a friend who would be willing to stand in for that for us.
Yeah, and I would really, given Ava's experience and stuff, I think be pretty happy to defer to them on a good path forward to this, and who could be that COC person and all that. So after the meeting, I'll add the link here. The other stuff that was in here was basically I was trying to pull out things that exist in the issues or discussions on GitHub, and in general, these are sort of reflecting long running discussions that we had. I don't know. I figure at this point we like pick out if they're based on sort of who's here, if there are things to particularly really focus on.
So I have not come back with the draft that I had promised for the alternate non-embedding proposal.
Yeah.
So I do apologize on that. And I also apologize. I am up against the bottom of the hour and I do have to drop, but I will see all of you next week.
See you next week. Put this in here.
Okay.
At some point, maybe the next meeting where we have Jeremy back, I do want to cover this with him, which is just that he had a previous comment on the issue tracker that had just like a big list of different sort of issues with the spec or proposals for things, some of which have since been addressed, some of which haven't. I tried to sort of go through and identify what remains and suggested that those be split out into separate issues, but you know, they kind of didn't want to do that without getting concurrence from him that reflects that doing so would reflect what he was actually trying to provide in feedback. So can follow up with Jeremy next time he's in.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so I feel like the input roles thing, and just in general, the concept of encoding additional data in artifact input manifests has been, you know, kind of an ongoing discussion. I don't remember exactly where we left off with things. Okay, so we had a sort of latest update, which I'm assuming was summarizing working group meeting from Ava from about a month ago. Yeah, since we don't have Jeremy, I think that he was sort of driving this. Do we want to try and proceed with it anyway, or should we, you know, come back to this?
I think something we should probably come back to. It's harder to have conversations without the main people involved.
And then I think the same thing is true for convergence and divergence. Yes. So I'd sort of say the same then. And then this is a new thing that it was a comment that Ava had made previously that had been captured somewhere in the stock, but nothing had actually been made an issue for it. This was about sort of like dealing with how we define reproducibility, and if it's sort of worthwhile splitting out or defining a strong notion of reproducibility versus a weak notion. So strong basically is as it's currently sort of understood, it's you know, bitwise identical. I think the idea for weak reproducibility was to have a definition which basically permitted removing, like if you've added metadata to say like, hey, strip that metadata first and then, you know, have reproducibility of everything else. But this was sort of driven by Ava. So I think again, I don't want to, you know, we want to have Ava's input on this. And then this was also just sort of an open discussion thing from that was previously in there. So I don't know if there's more to say here. I think we're kind of premature for deciding this. Also, I'll admit I don't really know the process for ISO very well.
Oh, that's quite interesting.
Sorry, what was that, Frederick?
I was saying that's quite interesting.
Yeah, the proposal of how to deal with this.
Yeah, ISO is not a group that I work with, so it'll be interesting to see how that works for really what the start of the process is.
Yeah, So I linked to this page, which is it sort of describes their process. But my understanding is the PAS fast track thing skips parts of this, and I don't understand enough to characterize what you're skipping exactly and how you get PAS fast track. But
is that for like things that already exist? So
yeah, I believe so. It's PAS is, I forget the acronym, but it basically is like an acronym for standards that already exist out in the world that ISO is sort of taking and standardizing, like taking
okay.
and turning into an ISO thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, so it's, as you can see here, you get a track, and then depending on your track, that sets a fixed time frame that I guess goes from anywhere from 1.5 years to 3 years. And then they define, fixed amounts of time and fixed sort of steps for each of these stages. But you can see like there are opportunities to skip different stages depending on what's happening.
Okay.
But yeah, all I know is what I had gotten from skimming this page yesterday. So not very much.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I think maybe this one is just come back to.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Like I know the initial connections with them, the initial calls and so on, they take a little bit of time.
Okay. So then I think all that's left, these were just a few things that I'd added. We'd had stuff at the top of the agenda that had been there for a while marked as deferred topics and future agenda items. And I wasn't sure sort of what to do with those and if they reflected things that we still care about, that are still relevant, what should be done with them. One of them had a name associated with it, which was Elliot, something about, hash fragility. I don't know when this was added and what next meeting meant in that context, but so there's this thing of talking about hash fragility. I assume discuss and finalize format and content of the BOM section. I'm assuming this is meaning the section in the ELF data, which
I think that is done.
I was going to say,
that can be removed. Yeah. And the next one, format for Symlink farm, I think that can also be removed because that was discussed in the context of non-embed mode. And there is already an action item on Ed that he's going to, post a PR or update that section. So that's also obsolete.
Okay, cool. So can get rid of both of those. That's good. But yeah, the stuff about linear transformations in OmniBOR trees, and then hash fragility, I don't really know.
I think the hash fragility was when we were using SHA-1, and then we have SHA-1, the option of SHA-1 and SHA-2 as well. So this was a very old discussion when initially we were only proposing the use of SHA-1, and there were concerns that SHA-2 is more, it's better than SHA-1, or it's more stronger, whatever, that discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we would maybe consider this one resolved by just the fact that you can support, that we support SHA-256.
And multiple other SHA types in future if need to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There was a path towards as a best practice doing two formats rather than one. So like SHA-1 and SHA-256 if you're dealing with really, really sensitive information where you have to ensure that if one of the hashes was like fundamentally broken, that you're still in good shape. But outside of that, the main thing was support multiple hashes, and then we standardize on SHA-1 and SHA-256 as the two that are there. We cannot get rid of SHA-1 at this particular point, I believe, until, I mean, technically, even though we're not mechanically coupled to them, we're coupled with Git SHA-1 just based upon the some of the workflows that we've discussed.
Mhm.
So we can't just get rid of, we cannot just simply say get rid of SHA-1 and then deal with like SHA-2 and SHA-3 or some other combination. And we'll see how this plays out over the next 5 years as the U.S. government deadline approaches, where they say no SHA-1 anywhere in FedRAMP or other similar systems. We'll see if they maintain that or if they relax. So that's going to be a really interesting set of discussions over the next several years.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, okay. Cool. So I think that just leaves the linear transformations thing. Does anyone know what was meant by this?
This one, I'm thinking this is probably the unary transform, right? For example, the strip command usually just strip some symbols on the single input file and generate the same output file, right? That kind of thing, right? I'm thinking that's probably about that, right? So, so this thing, I think by default, for example, if we use the embedded mode this way, as long as the strip command does not strip the embedded BOM ID, then that same BOM ID will be kept, right? So by default, it will stay the same, unless you want to do something special to want to really reflect this one, then you need to create a new OmniBOR document with a single input, right? Then you replace the BOM ID. That way you add one more hierarchy level on the tree, right? So that's two options you can choose. But by default, I think we don't change. So it will keep the same. So in BOMs, we have option to specify this behavior. Either you want to create a new one or you just keep the same one. And if it keeps the same one, we actually can still distinguish this kind of unary transform or linear transform because we keep like a stack of the build command for that. So you will see there's a command chain that's really leading you with a single input file to, for example, a strip command, or obj copy command, that kind of thing. We still know that, but we know the BOM ID don't change actually for this kind of unary transform. I think that's just some flavor.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, probably.
So I mean, it sounds like if Bomsch is basically handling this, with some choice of how you want to handle it,
right?
I don't think that there's more to say here. Like, at least it doesn't need an issue or discussion or anything.
Probably, I'm not sure. Any question or comments on that?
Yeah. Okay, but I mean, if it comes back, we can always add more stuff. But there's nothing current to sort of track for it. Yeah. Cool. Hey, that's 4 things cleared out. My next thing, and these were basically minor issues that I'd opened on the spec repo. They're tagged as easy. One of them here, I can open this up actually. And this might have just been like a merge error, but the precedence for the setting of the OmniBOR dir variable is currently, this is just a quote, listed as this. So you can see the first and third item are the same. Which then it's like, which one did we mean? Do we want the environment variable to take precedence or the build tool specific flag to take precedence? Because this is sort of clearly wrong. So, but so that needs to be resolved. And then the NXB doc has a couple of markdown errors, like with triple backtick code blocks not being correct. The first line of the code block can't be on the same line as the triple backticks. And that happens a few times. And then currently the main document doesn't actually refer to Annex C. It refers to A and B, but not to C. So if someone is willing to take on doing these fixes, that would be helpful.
I'll try to take a look at a few of those, at least the first one, fixed duplication and markdown syntax.
Okay, thanks. And I mean, I personally, I figure like even if the stuff gets fixed in a single MR, like if these get sort of combined, that isn't really a problem. Or I guess, sorry, PR, not MR. Spend most of my time in GitLab, not GitHub. Cool. And then this was just like a thought about adding an item up here for checking in with, and maybe even just renaming POC demos to sort of check in with implementers. It's kind of how I used it today anyway, but kind of a chance for implementers to ask questions or seek input, things like that. All right, I mean, if everyone's all right with it, I'm happy to make that change.
I don't see any issue with that.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's it then. So kind of going back over to-dos. Frederick, you're working on the doodle poll. I'm going to do a draft of the document. Ed's going to work on these PRs. Next time we have Ava, can sort of work up, try to work more on the governance stuff. Next time we get Jeremy, got a couple things with him. Ed's going to work on a new draft of non-embedding. Come back about reproducibility next time we have Ava. This one is just sort of a keep on the discussion, but come back to later. And Rathi will take some of these. And I'll update the agenda. Cool. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for me.
Cool. So with that, do we have any other topics that people would like to discuss? If not, let's go ahead and close it up, and thank you all for your time, and we'll see you all again at the same time next week. Take care.
Yeah. Bye, y'all.